Penn State's only 11-11 the past two seasons, but plenty of talent on both sides of the ball, and in particular on the offensive side to make amends there, although some key losses to address as well. Spring practice starts on March 21st in Happy Valley. We've got our guys here, Marty Leap and Tim Aiden from Black Shoe Diaries on SB Nation to help us break down the offensive side of the ball. Sean Clifford's back. Let's start there at quarterback. And as soon as that was announced, I know that I received a couple derogatory comments about that. I didn't get it. I think the guy is a top 3 to 4 quarterback in the conference. And on top of that, showed a ton of leadership and guts this past season in particular, Marty, in regards to getting off the deck and facing some top-level defenses when he wasn't at his best physically and was still able to gut it out and really carry an offense when there was no running game to support him.
Yeah, I understand. It's a lot of Sean Clifford fatigue, I feel, more than anything. And I know that's definitely something I'm a victim of at times. But, you know, if you look at Penn State's quarterback room, there's a lot of talent there with Drew Alar and Bo Prabula. Excuse me. You know, anyone who listens to us have heard Tim and I talk ad nauseum about those guys. But, you know, you don't ever want to throw a true freshman out there, a quarterback, if you don't absolutely have to, no matter how talented they are. And that's where getting Clifford back is so important for this offense. He's been a starter for 3 years now. This will be year 4. He's been at the school for 6 years. That veteran presence, that leadership, like you said, Mark, he's one of the toughest guys you're ever going to see on a football field, especially at the quarterback position. So he really does kind of set the tone as a great leader for the offense. And, you know, as much as people, sometimes myself included, will complain about Sean Clifford, the fact of the matter is if the guy entered the transfer portal right now, he'd be the hottest commodity in the transfer portal with his experience, with the talents he does have. So while, yes, on one hand, you could do better than Sean Clifford at quarterback, you certainly, and this is something as Penn State fans we've suffered a lot with over the years, you certainly could do much worse than Sean Clifford at quarterback also.
Well, as someone who remembers, you know, guys like Matt Seneca starting at quarterback, I can definitely say you can do worse than Sean Clifford as your starter. And, you know, like a Marty hit on, I think it's good. I mean, obviously, yeah, we all got Sean Clifford fatigue, I think, at this point, because we know what he is. He's good, but he's not a great quarterback who's gonna get your team over the hump, win the Big Ten, get you to a playoff. But he, as far as intangibles, leadership, you know, setting a tone for the younger guys in the team, I mean, he's tremendous in that aspect. And I think having him back for a 6th year, especially like, you know, with Drew Auer, Bo Prabula coming on board, I think it's just for those two especially, it's great. And even Christian Vay, it's good to have a guy like Cliff there for an extra year to, you know, just really show you how to prepare, how it's all done, you know, what it means to be the starting quarterback at Penn State. You know, all the little things that we don't think about that goes into preparation. I feel that's where he's really going to be valuable. So, and I should also add, just from the past couple seasons, you know, knowing how Cliff has a tendency to get beaten down and hurt, there's a decent chance we could see, you know, one of the 3 other quarterbacks I just mentioned see some significant playing time, important playing time, because Cliff either gets hurt or has some nagging issue that prevents him from performing at his best. And, you know, unlike last year, I think this coming year, Franklin will be much quicker to bench Cliff if he's not his effective self. You won't see situations like the Illinois game last year, for example, where it was crystal clear Cliff could not, you know, was nowhere near 100% and probably wasn't even 50% if you ask me. If we had, you know, if Vay was a little further along in being ready, and especially if you had a Prabula or Auer at that point, I would think he would have put one of them in, you know, like probably in the first quarter when it was clear that Cliff just didn't have that day. Kind of similar to what he did in the Rutgers game when it was clear that, you know, Cliff was being hobbled by the flu, and he threw in Christian Vay, who went on to, you know, have a solid performance. So that's my other hope with this situation. But I'd say overall quarterback is looking better this coming year already than it ever did last season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel very confident in saying the quarterback room Penn State currently has, if they would have had that quarterback room last year, even with Sean Clifford getting hurt, they still would have started 7-0. VU, where he's at now, Alar or Prabula, would have done enough to still hang on and beat Iowa, and certainly would have done more than enough to beat Illinois, I feel. And at that point, who knows where the season goes? That just changes absolutely everything for this team, for this program. So the quarterback room is definitely, I think, this spring will be exciting, really, for fans to watch, because Sean Clifford's going to get the veteran treatment. We're not going to see a ton of Clifford, and you don't need to see a ton of Clifford. You know what you have in him. He knows the offense. Let's see these young guys. Let's see them get some reps. Let's see them learn the offense. There's going to be a play in the spring game. Alar is going to throw a pretty 60-yard bomb to somebody. Prabula is going to show off his wheels and outrun a defender or something. VU is going to make some plays because that's what he did when he was on the field last year. And it's just going to be exciting because as Penn State fans, we're so used to – I feel like outside of a couple of the Trace McSorley years, everyone's always said, man, just imagine if Penn State had a quarterback. Look at that team. Just imagine if they had a quarterback. And for the first time in a long time, there are a lot of viable options at quarterback. There's a lot of talent in that room. And with a guy like Drew Alar, who, again, for those who might be new to the show, don't follow Penn State regularly, whatever it is, Alar was by 247 Sports number 3 player in the country, number 1 quarterback in the country in his recruiting class. It looks like you finally have that quarterback capable of taking you to the college football playoff and beyond potentially. So for a program that Tim, for the better part of 20 plus years, maybe longer, has just been, imagine if they had that quarterback. It's nice to finally have a quarterback room with multiple options that are extremely talented and at least one option that looks like has the skill set, has that elite ability to take this program to the next level.
For the first time in 3 years, Penn State has the same offensive coordinator returning. Mm-hmm. And I think, I wouldn't underestimate Cliff having another year working under Mike Yursich. And, now he's got a more firmer grasp of the system. And, same could be said for anyone who was on the quarterback roster last year, like Bayu, who's back this year. And so I wouldn't look – I would hope maybe things are a little more in sync.
Absolutely. Especially a coach like Yursich who has the reputation he has of working with quarterbacks, developing quarterbacks, and developing great offenses.
VU came into the Rutgers game through the 3 touchdown passes, and granted, it's a lot different playing Rutgers defense at home than Iowa's defense on the road. 2 different deals, but was it ever uncovered? Did anyone ever ask why VU was not the option instead of Taquan Roberson against Iowa when Clifford went down?
I think it was just they felt like VU wasn't quite there yet with the offense. Excuse me. VU had only been on campus since I think like July or August. Well, Roberson had been around for a few years. You go back and watch that Iowa game. They obviously had some faith in Roberson because the first couple of possessions, they came out and he was chucking the ball around. He was throwing it deep. Like Yursich was calling his offense until it became clear he couldn't. So they had faith in him. I think it's just from what we gathered, from what was said, it seems like they just thought VU wasn't quite there yet. As a true freshman at Iowa City, he had never played in a game before. Roberson had game action. Hindsight 2020, I'm sure if the staff could do it over, they would have done it differently. But, I think that was the biggest thing was they didn't want to take the kid who was a true freshman who had only been living in the United States, I think, for 2 or 3 years at this point, had only been on campus since like July or August, and throw him into that atmosphere, which, as frustrating as it could be as a fan, I can understand that train of thought from James Franklin and Mike Yursich.
I should add, Marty, he hadn't played in a live football game in 2 years at that point. Mm-hmm. So I think there may have been reluctance to throw him into the fire like that, to make that his first live game action since his junior year of high school. It's a little different when you're doing it at home against Rutgers as opposed to on the road in Iowa City when you're trying to hang on to a tenuous lead. Absolutely.
I was just curious because of what VO showed in that Rutgers game versus Taquan Roberson looked like to me a bit of a deer in headlights for the majority of that game. We got Tim Aiden on the line. We got Marty Leap on the line. Black Shoe Diaries breaking down the Penn State offense. And the Nittany Lions hit the spring practice field on March 21st. We would ask for you to simply hit the like button. And you can also share these videos out on social media because if you're enjoying the content, others will as well. At running back, Tim, it was just a few years ago that Devin Ford and Noah Cain came in as top 5 running backs in the nation, the pair from Louisiana. Well, Noah Cain leaves the program. Devin Ford's still here. Kevon Lee, of course, coming off the most productive season from the running back room. But you got to think this is the one target in terms of the entire team to get Penn State to where they want to be. This running game's got to get a lot better.
Absolutely. I don't know what the rank was exactly, but it was pretty damn near the bottom of out of 130 teams. There was somewhere in the 120s in rush yards per game, which is, for Penn State, I mean, that's just unfathomable. Like, I know we're a long ways away from 3 yards in a cloud of dust, but still you'd expect a Penn State team to be able to run the ball half decently, and they couldn't even do that. And frankly, that's also what cost them games against Iowa and Illinois. If you just had a serviceable ground game, maybe even with a Taquan Roberson at quarterback, you could perhaps have hung on in Iowa City, perhaps could do enough to beat Illinois, but, water under the bridge. But I think with the running back room, there's definitely some optimism with Nick Singleton coming in now. And Marty and I have also said this ad nauseum on our shows, but the starting job is there for him to grab by the horns at this point. And from what I've read so far on like Lions 20%, I've seen like some videos posted of him just absolutely crushing it in squats in the weight room. And, and people are saying it invokes memories of Saquon Barkley doing the same things in the weight room. So we'll see how it translates for him on the field. But that's another, besides Aaron Perbula, it's also another incoming freshman I'm going to keep an eye on during spring practice, and especially in the blue-white game, to see if he can, razzle-dazzle the crowd at all of some big plays. But, if he continues to develop the way he has, stays healthy, I really think, maybe if he's not the starter at the beginning, I mean, I could see like Kevon Lee probably starting the game at Purdue, but it wouldn't shock me if he's already getting a decent number of carries in that season opener, in game 1 of his collegiate career, and eventually maybe a couple games in becomes a starter himself. I mean, I think he's that good. The room is that wide open. Now, as far as you mentioned Devin Ford, I guess we'll see if he's still with the team after spring practice. I still have this lingering thought in the back of my mind that, maybe after spring practice, depending where he is, maybe he sees the writing on the wall that he's going to have a hard time cracking the running back rotation. Won't be anything more than a guy who's on special teams for returning kicks. And maybe, he wants to get more playing time elsewhere. It's certainly not inconceivable to me that he could hit the portal. Kind of similar to what Noah Cain did. Maybe Devin Ford may just want a reset, kind of like what Cain felt like he needed. And which, it was clear with Noah that he was going to be the odd man out going forward, which it's unfortunate because he definitely showed promise as a freshman back in 2019. But, it is what it is. But I do think I'm hopeful. Frankly, it can't get any worse. So I'm hopeful the running game will be more productive.
Yeah, like you said, it can't get much worse. You add Singleton to the mix. The kid looks like he's, like you said, you don't ever want to compare anybody to Saquon Barkley, but there's a lot of Barkley-like features, the Singleton, just the build, the explosiveness, the strength, all of this. And I think that's one thing Penn State really missed last year with this running game was, yes, people will dump on the offensive line, and this is something I wrote about a lot during the season. There were games, it was the running backs and not the offensive line. There were holes there. Yeah, they weren't great, but there was holes there to be had. There were running lanes, and the running backs either didn't see them, didn't hit them, whatever it was. So you throw a guy like Singleton with his elite burst and acceleration and speed. I think that you don't. We saw this with Saquon. When Saquon was here, those offensive lines were not very good.
It's true. Everyone gets a free new Samsung Galaxy.
He had the ability to take a small hole, a small opening, and just turn it into a big play. And I think Singleton is the same way. And, you mentioned Kevon Lee, Tim, and I know this is something we talked about during the season on the show. You and I and Ellie mentioned it as well. You have to wonder, if you watched Kevon Lee last year and you watched Kevon Lee 2 years ago, they look like two totally different backs. Last year, it seemed like a lot of times he was putting too much pressure on himself to be the big run back, like the home run back, which he's not, and that's fine. And my kind of hope is that now that you'll add Singleton as that home run threat, if Lee's cool with being the guy he was as a freshman in 2020, give me the ball, I'll run over a linebacker, I'll take 4 or 5 yards and go back to the huddle and do it again. Because you can have a very effective running game with that combination, that thunder and lightning combination, which I hope we get. So we'll see what happens. Like you said, Devin Ford, I still think there can be a role for him on this team. He's elusive enough in the open field, rather as a third down back on special teams. I know James Franklin thinks the world of him. There's been talk of Ford potentially coming on as a grad assistant whenever he does hang up the cleats as a player. So I know there's a lot of respect between him and the coaching staff, and they think the world of him and his football IQ. So I do think there can be a role for him yet, but my biggest hope is you add Singleton, you add that home run threat, and even if your offensive line play is not great like it was last year, when you have a guy who, again, not saying he's going to be Saquon Barkley, but Barkley-esque, where you don't need to give them a lot of room to make the big play. You don't have to have great blocking. You don't have to have excellent offensive line play to make that work. So I'm really hopeful that with Singleton in the picture, and like you touched on, Tim, since he's joined campus or got on campus, he's done nothing but turn heads. And when you had it down on the screen there, Mark, he was number 31 player in the country by 247 Sports Composite. When you're number 31 player in the country, you come in with very high expectations. By all reports, he has exceeded those expectations his first couple of months on campus. So I think Penn State fans, as hard as it may be to be optimistic about the running game, I'm also not going to fault anyone who is optimistic about it because of Nick Singleton.
Talking Penn State football, the Nittany Lions hit the field here in a few weeks in Happy Valley to make amends for 7-6 and get better, and they certainly have the talent to do so. We got Tim Aiden on the line from Black Shoe Diaries and also Marty Leap from SB Nation's Black Shoe Diaries. In a league that was loaded with great wide receivers, and we're seeing it right now at the NFL Combine at places like Ohio State, Michigan State, and elsewhere. Jahan Dotson certainly didn't need to take a back seat to anyone. He was phenomenal. And Parker Washington steps in as the number one guy. Tim, as you go through the wide receiver room, how does it look to you?
I think that the starting group should be a solid bunch. You mentioned Parker Washington. I think he's poised to step into the number one receiver role at this point. A guy can just, maybe he's not like a speedster necessarily, but man, does he just he makes some nice grabs. And at with his build, he has the ability to break that initial tackle after the catch and perhaps turn a smaller gain into an even bigger gain. And also just having that kind of a low center of gravity. So he makes it difficult to just easily bring him down. And then Keandre Lambert-Smith, who had a nice touchdown grab in the Outback Bowl. He seems like a guy who's ready to step into a larger role as one of the go-to receivers. And then the reason I'm high on the starting group is Mitchell Tinsley, incoming transfer out of Western Kentucky, put up some strong numbers. I don't have them pulled up at the moment, but
there you go.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. See, 1,400 yards, 14 touchdowns. I don't care what school it's at. That's pretty good numbers. So, I think he's a guy who could, might be ready to make a leap to the Big Ten, be a productive guy there. And then you got some incoming guys like Anthony Ivy is one name I think of from the incoming recruiting class. And then you got guys I've read Trey Wallace, who was true freshman last year, kind of a late recruit from the 2021 cycle, but he's apparently, his athleticism has been turning some heads, and there's some videos of him on social media of him pulling off some sick dunks in Penn State's IM building. He was a pretty good basketball player in high school himself, so he brings some, and the thing is, like, these multi-sport athletes, that athleticism from different sports can translate well to whatever position they're playing in football. The staff seems pretty high on him in that regards. We'll see how Malik Mega, he made his presence known when he caught his first career touchdown pass against Rutgers last season, and which there wasn't a defender within probably 20, 30 yards of him when he made his grab. But, the guy's tall and he's got good speed. So we'll see if he's a guy that's also been talked about. He's due for a breakthrough anytime soon. So hopefully that breakthrough happens this coming year. That's probably another guy to keep an eye on for the spring game is Malik Mega. And then there's Sean Clifford's Liam Clifford, who was also a true freshman last year. And he's a guy maybe to keep an eye on. Perhaps maybe we'll get a cliff-to-cliff touchdown connection this coming year, hopefully. Who knows? But I'm curious to see how, the guys who aren't going to be starters, who emerges amongst that group.
Yeah, I'm pretty bullish on the wide receiver group. Like you said, Parker Washington, never going to be some speedster. I think it's kind of ironic that he's now his position coach, but a guy who I think Washington really comps to well as a player is Taylor Stubblefield, who Stubblefield was at Purdue. He was never a speedster, just excellent route running, great hands, caught everything, and became a college football Hall of Famer as a result. You look around, Mitchell Tinsley, the numbers he put up at Western Kentucky were ridiculous. He should replace Jahan Dotson well. And then from there, you need someone else to merge, but there's so much talent in that room. Like you mentioned, Tim, Keandre Lambert-Smith really flashed at times last year. He feels like one of those guys who, and I think we kind of joked about this in the Black Shoe Diary Slack channel going up to the bowl game, of him having the way Chris Godwin burst onto the scene in the Pinstripe Bowl in 2014, Keandre Lambert-Smith being a guy who could have a similar game in the Outback Bowl. And he had a pretty good Outback Bowl. Like he said, he had that long touchdown catch. And just you could see him really, as the season went on, continuing to put the pieces together. Malik Mega is definitely a guy I'm very intrigued by also. I know last year the staff expected him to be a home run threat from the get-go, but he got dinged up in camp, and it took till late in the season to get healthy. And once he got healthy, we saw Mega start to get reps. We saw that long touchdown against Rutgers. Trey Wallace is an athletic freak they're high on. The true freshman, Kaden Saunders, is a kid who I think is going to play. Top 100 receiver out of the state of Ohio. Had offers from everywhere. A lot of KJ Hamler in Kaden Saunders. I think we see him play a lot as a true freshman. So, yeah, at the wide receiver room, there's a ton of talent there. One thing that Taylor Stubblefield has proven in his first years in Happy Valley is he's a tremendous wide receiver coach. That was a hire that a lot of Penn State people, I know you and I were in this boat. We kind of scratched our head at it at first, and it's one of the best hires James Franklin's ever made, recruiting, receiver development, everything. So when you've got a room with that much talent and that good of a coach, you kind of just don't worry about it. The last couple of years at Penn State, it seems like they always have to replace guys at receiver, and someone always steps up. You lost Godwin, and Hamilton and Juwan Johnson stepped up, and then it was Hamler, and then it was Dotson and Parker Washington. Then you have Washington still, and Lambert-Smith and Tinsley in the group. I think they'll be good at receiver. I think they have a lot of talent there. I think as long as Sean Clifford's healthy, whoever's the quarterback's healthy, and the offensive line gives them time to throw the ball, I think Penn State should have a pretty effective passing game this season.
Of course, by extension, the tight end position in the receiving game, and Penn State's been loaded there in recent years with Mike Gesicki and Pat Freiermuth. So, Marty, in terms of the tight end position, where do we stand?
Yeah, tight end's another group. Definitely some good talent there. Theo Johnson probably projected to be the starter right now. He's a guy I'm very high on, another former top 100 recruit out of Canada who, again, last year you could see it at times. He'd have a 25-yard catch here, go up over top of a guy to bring a ball down there. You could just see as the season went on, everything's starting to fall into place for Theo. I think he comes through, has a big season. Tyler Warren is a guy I know the staff is very high on, a former high school quarterback. Anyone who watched Penn State last year, you saw they had a lot of different packages for Warren in the backfield. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. But he's a guy the staff's very high on. I know they're very pleasantly surprised with how far he's come as a tight end from having played quarterback in high school to not just the receiving aspect of it, but he's probably the most physical blocker of the tight ends on the roster. And then there's Bretton Strange, who I feel like is almost like the forgotten man, was a starting tight end at the beginning of the season last year and really didn't do anything. I mean, he had a drop against Iowa that was pretty costly, but outside of that, Strange really didn't do anything to lose playing time. It's just Johnson and Warren kept improving as the year went on. So that's a good problem to have. They have 3 very talented tight ends. This has been a team that, like you said, Mark, going back to the days of Mike Gesicki, has proven they will use their tight ends. And, there's some guys there. Theo Johnson can be an absolute nightmare matchup in the red zone. Tyler Warren's a physical guy who you can bring in even as an H-back to help block and that sort of thing, and just get him the ball and let him plow over guys, get those tough yards. And Bretton Strange might be the most athletic of the 3. So there's definitely a lot of talent in that tight end room still.
I'm really curious to see how Bretton Strange, what ends up coming with him, because he was kind of projected to be him and Theo Johnson projected to be the guys last year, and they both had their moments, but neither of them, I guess, maybe wowed you like you thought they would. So we'll see, and I do think Theo's probably in the driver's seat now to be the starter, just because of his sheer athleticism at this point. I guess we'll see if Strange he can solidify a spot in the rotation still, or if he gets kind of edged out by Theo, and Tyler Warren is there creeping up behind him perhaps. Then you got Jerry Cross, true freshman, who's already enrolled on campus now, a 4-star recruit out of Wisconsin. I wouldn't expect to see much, significant game action from him this year, but maybe a guy to keep an eye on for the spring game. I'm sure he'll get some run in that. So getting an early glimpse of what he can bring to the table. So it's a group that you hope will be a little more productive this year, perhaps, especially if Theo can, become the prospect we all thought he could be when he first arrived on campus.
Yeah, I think one more thing real quick at the tight ends. I think it's, in a lot of ways, it's comparable to the running back room. They weren't good enough last year. You need to see more out of the tight ends this year. But similar to the running backs, you kind of feel okay because there's talent there. It's not like sometimes, when we get to the defensive preview, we'll get into the linebacker. It's a totally different scenario where you worry about linebacker because you worry about the talent there. That's not the case with like running back and tight end, for example. There's talent at those positions. Those guys just need to play better. And in some cases, like a Bretton Strange, we just need to see them play like we've seen them play in the past, and things will be okay. So that's why, tight end's definitely a position, like you said, Tim, they've got to be better than they were last year, but it's easy to feel good about the position still because there is still a ton of talent there. And 9 times out of 10, if you have 3 talented players at a position like Penn State has a tight end, at least one of them are going to figure it out, and you're going to prove to be okay in the long run.
We got your Penn State football breakdown here at the Voice of College Football, courtesy our guys here, Marty Leap and Tim Aiden, who join us on a regular basis and also hosted all our Penn State post-game shows in 2021. You can catch their work at Black Shoe Diaries on SB Nation with the football team. And, of course, March Madness is right here as well. All right, on to the offensive line. I guess, Tim, we'll go to you. It's not been the best of units since James Franklin took over in regards to, really going way back almost a decade now, it getting hit with all the scholarship reductions and the aftermath of the issues at that point, and really never getting to that place of elite status in the Big Ten.
I think it's something that even goes beyond before James Franklin. I guess there was maybe the first year of Bill O'Brien, 2012, when it was, I guess, a pretty good unit. And then I guess it was okay in 2013. But then, by 2014, the sanctions were really starting to affect the program. And it was no more pronounced than on the offensive line. Back then, they come to the field at 2 deep of scholarship guys. I think they had 7 or 8 scholarship offensive linemen in Franklin's first year. So it's pretty dire then. I remember, there's an iconic photo of 2 Penn State guys blocking each other. One of their, I think it was at the game against
Northwestern. Homecoming in 2014.
I was at that game, but you have an iconic photo. And then, I guess to see the O-line struggle the way it did in last year, I'm not gonna lie. I thought we were beyond those types of struggles. I thought that was something that was going to be in the past with sanctions, but unfortunately, I think it's a combination of, some medical hardships. One of their best offensive line recruits from 2018, Nana Asidu, had to medically retire when he came in after getting his physical done, and they realized there was a enlarged heart. And then, other guys who maybe just didn't quite pan out the way you'd hope they would. And I guess, I don't know. I guess you could say also, I'm sure, changing offensive line coaches, Phil Troutwine, I guess to his credit, lately he's been crushing it on the recruiting trail with the 2023 kids. But, as far as on the field production so far, the first couple of years, it's left a lot to be desired. I know there's been some debate amongst us in the Black Sheep Diaries Slack channel over whether, Trout should have been fired or not. But I don't know. If you ask me, I think it's good he's coming back again. I just don't think it's good to continually keep shuffling coaches on the O-line, because they do kind of bring different philosophies on. So you want to have some consistency there. And now that they're crushing the recruiting trail, especially, I really hope that year 300 Trout is when the O-line starts to make some strides. So I'll say, I think it helps. All due respect to Mike Miranda, I'm sure he's a good kid, but I think it's addition by subtraction that Juice Scruggs is going to replace him now on that center. And then, they're projecting guys like Olufashanu, Landon Tangwell, who is a highly touted recruit from the 2021 class, probably also starting. Sal Wormley, who was hurt last year, didn't really see much action. He's a guy that the staff's been high on and would be a projected starter, assuming he stays healthy. And then Kaden Wallace, we'll see. Hopefully he can turn it around. He's a guy that I know the staff's been high on. Didn't quite come together for him. And then you got a key guy out of the transfer portal, Hunter Norzad, who played at Cornell. And I know Penn State got him over I know Iowa and Illinois were his other 2 finalists. And I know what you're thinking, he beat out Iowa and Illinois. Well, if those 2 programs really want this kid, and knowing their philosophy on offense, I think it's a great get for Penn State, because it sounds like a guy who can run block for you, who can probably pass protect well enough. It's definitely a kid I'm glad to have on board. Maybe he can carve out a starting role for himself, or at the very least, he's a guy who should factor heavily into the rotation. So, again, these things, these little things give me some hope that, we'll have a serviceable offensive line this coming year.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think the offensive line can't be worse than last year.
Running back, so.
Yeah, I do think, like you said, the Mike Miranda thing, not to crap on the guy, but definitely seems to be addition by subtraction type of deal. And I think Juice Scruggs moving from guard to center will do him a lot of good. And you also mentioned with Nana Asidu, well, Juice Scruggs was the same recruiting class as Nana Asidu was. And Scruggs missed, a year and a half or something, because he was in a car accident when he broke his back, and it wasn't even sure he'd ever be able to walk again, let alone play football. So he's a guy who, now that he finally has that full healthy season under his belt of 2021, I'm sure that'll only do a world of good for him. I'm really excited about the potential of the left side of the offensive line. I think Landon Tangwell is going to be a dude for them. Like you said, former top 100 recruit. Last year as a true freshman, played what was it? I think the final 4 games of the season pretty significantly. And you didn't notice him. And if you don't notice an offensive lineman, that's usually a good thing. They're like referees. The less you notice them, the better, because you know they're doing their job well. So he's probably your starter at left guard. Left tackle, most likely Olu Fashanu, who I think he will be a redshirt sophomore, I want to say now. And he's a guy who I know the staff has sky-high hopes for. And he's another guy, started in the Outback Bowl, started against Rutgers when a lot of the team was sick. And in both those games, you didn't notice him. He went out there and he held up well. And, those are the kind of things with young offensive linemen that give you hope for the future. I think Hunter Norzad coming in is going to be a big addition. Right tackle is definitely, I think, the biggest question mark right now. Kaden Wallace was also a very highly rated recruit. I think he was like the 70th best player in the country, something like that, by 247 Sports in his recruiting class. But he was recruited as a guard, has been kicked out the tackle because of Penn State having depth issues at tackle, and he's just not a tackle. I think as of now, he would still be your starting right tackle. I think that's going to be your biggest question mark, is getting that right tackle position figured out. Olu Fashanu at left tackle is going to, and Tangwell at left guard. It's going to be the first year starters. They're going to take some lumps, but ultimately I think those guys are talented enough. They work it out. Like I said, I really like Scruggs at center. Hunter Norzad, like you mentioned, and I know people are going to make the lazy comparison to Eric Wilson. They brought him from Harvard last year as an Ivy League guy, but it's night and day. Norzad was actually a guy who, I remember Brian Doan of National Reporter for 247 Sports talking about this. He had like a 4th or 5th round grade for the NFL draft. This guy easily could have been drafted, but wanted to go play a year in the Big Ten with the hopes of turning into a 1st, 2nd, 3rd round pick. So it's not like Wilson, where Wilson didn't have this draft grade and didn't, he had to move up to try and reach the NFL. NFL teams would draft Norzad if he was in the draft this year. So, Penn State, as weird as it may sound, against Penn State, has not had a lot of offensive linemen drafted in recent years. So having draftable offensive linemen is a big step in the right direction for the Nittany Lions. And for that right tackle spot, to circle back to that, I know they continue to hit the portal for tackles. Tyler Steen, who has been a 2-year starter at Vanderbilt at left tackle, is expected to officially visit this month some point as a potential transfer at right tackle. Jimmy Christ is a guy they like a lot, who is slowly but surely coming along over there at right tackle. And if you absolutely had to, Tangwell can kick out the tackle and play there, because you have more options on the interior. Like you mentioned, Sal Wormley, getting him back from injury will be big. You have Norzad, you have Drew Scruggs who can play inside. Nick Dawkins is another player at center they like a lot as an interior offensive lineman. So I think with Penn State, with the spring, when people watch the blue-white game and they see the offensive line struggling, I think it's going to be easy to get concerned about the season. But people need to remember, too, the offensive line will look a lot different in the fall. Wormley's coming off of injury. We're not going to see a lot of him. Norzad doesn't enroll till May. Tangwell and Fashanu are going to take a lot of those freshman-type bumps this spring. So you're going to see a lot of growth and even some addition to the offensive line between now and the fall. Things could come through with Tyler Steen. I'm sure there's going to be other offensive linemen they may pursue in the portal. So while the offensive line is going to be far from a finished product this spring, I think by the time they kick off in West Lafayette on September 3rd, you're going to see a better offensive line than last year. And, Tim, with Phil Troutwine, I have definitely voiced my displeasures with Troutwine. But with how well he's done with recruiting, I'm with you to where, unless the offensive line is just a complete disaster again this year, I think you have to give him another year, because he's recruiting so well at the position. Let him not just get his guys in here, but getting guys who, I mean, right now Penn State has 2 5-star offensive line commits in the 2023 class. Like, you've got to get those guys to campus, let them work with their coach. And, if that point things don't pan out, then you look to make a move. But yeah, I think the offensive line will be better. How much better, I don't know. And that's probably going to dictate where this season goes for Penn State, is how much growth this offensive line makes. If they can make that jump to being good, they have the talent on offense as long as Sean Clifford is healthy, and the Sean Clifford we saw the first 5 games of last year, to come bounce back and win 10 games. They definitely have that kind of talent on offense. But if this offensive line comes out and continues to struggle, you're going to struggle to run the ball. You're going to get your quarterbacks beat up, as we've seen, and just things collapse from there. So the biggest factor for the 2022 Nittany Lions, in my opinion, is going to be this offensive line. How far can they come between now and September? And, as we mentioned, there's tons of reasons for concern, but there's definitely some reasons for optimism. Players improving, players who are going to be added, players who they've lost to, another guy, Rasheed Walker, who just never he was really good as a freshman in 2019, just seemed to get worse as his career went on. I mean, I know he had a lot of injuries last year, but just you're going to get fresh faces in there. You're going to get guys back. It's what the season's going to come down to is that offensive line play.
It's usually not reasonable to expect a true freshman to come on and make a major impact, especially one that's not an early enrollee. But just to note, Drew Shelton, of course, the top-rated offensive tackle in the class, 12th rated in the country. And also, I was curious about J.B. Nelson comes into this recruiting class, but he's a junior college guy, but he was rated the top tackle from the JUCO ranks.
Yeah, I think Nelson is a guy who could definitely factor in not just the right tackle, but potentially the interior also. I know the early reports on Nelson, since he's been on campus in January, great work ethic, excuse me. He's a player who's had a relationship with the staff for a long time. He's originally from the Pittsburgh area. It's just a matter of, can he get up to speed from the JUCO level to the FBS level between now and September? If he does, that's a huge addition to this offensive line. Even if he doesn't, I still think Nelson could have a very bright future down the road with Penn State. He was a guy who, if you'd watch his film from the spring season that JUCO played last year and then the fall season they played, looks like a totally different player. He made a ton of strides. It's just going from JUCO to the FBS level, the difference in the weight program, the nutrition program is just so significant. So I think with Nelson, I have no doubts the talent's there eventually. I have no doubts he's going to put in the work. It's just how quickly basically is his body going to respond to this. Excuse me. And if he can get to where he needs to be in terms of strength and his physical form by September, I would not be surprised to at some point this season see him factor in as well. And, that would obviously go a long way for Penn State, especially if Kaden Wallace does struggle at right tackle again and Nelson could potentially, be of assistance at right tackle.
All right, good stuff on the Penn State offense. And again, we are breaking down Penn State position by position with the help of Marty Leap, Tim Aiden. You got to catch their work at Black Shoe Diaries with basketball coming down the home stretch toward March Madness as well. And we'll come back.
Unfortunately, have to win the Big Ten tournament to partake in March Madness this year, but future is bright with Micah Shrewsbury.
Very nice. But we will come back and catch the defense here at some point.